American boys if they don't get out. If that's what you're talking about, and frankly, how are they going to get out? If we're afraid, if we're spending $3 billion to build air shelters here to prevent Russians from dropping atomic bombs in Washington and New York, aren't they going to bomb Marseilles and Bordeaux and Havre and wipe out any possibility of getting out of Europe? How are you going to get that out? That's a question I've asked Army officers. They don't know. They hope so. But doesn't it follow that if they have the atomic bomb, that it's almost impossible to get our soldiers out of Europe except possibly by air, as many as you could transport by air?
Senator?
Mr. Spivak.
In your speech you said, and I quote, "The President claims the right without consultation with Congress to decide whether or not we should use the atomic bomb." Now, do you think that Congress should be consulted on a matter of that kind, since obviously the decision might have to be made in a moment of emergency?
Well, I'm inclined, I looked up the law. The law expressly gives him the power to make that decision, the present law. And I suppose that probably in the long run he probably has to have it. It is only an example, perhaps, of the tremendous power that the president does have. Once the war is started, I think the president as commander-in-chief has full power to decide how that war shall be fought. And I wouldn't take that power away from him.
Well, which side would you
If
go
I
by?
were the president, though, I would like to be awfully certain that Congress or somebody approved the dropping of the atomic bomb.
May I ask you this, since you've probably given the matter considerable consideration, would you be in favor of using the bomb now?
No, not now.
You wouldn't use it against China?
I wouldn't use it against China.
Now, one other question on a military matter at the present moment. The Pentagon, I gather, is in favor of drafting 18-year-olders. Do you favor that at the present time?
Well, I went into it the beginning of the last war, and at that time I came to the conclusion that 18 was too young, that while most 18-old boys were all right, there were still a considerable number that were a little young. I would be inclined, and this is just an offhand proposal, maybe changed by evidence and everything else, to say that 18 and a half, and then require 6 months training before they could be sent abroad, at least, in war or otherwise, might be reasonable. After all, they ought to have 6 months training. That would make them 19 by the time they went abroad. Perhaps some compromise of that kind. I think just to grab them at 18 is a little bit...
Now, there's also a great deal of discussion of increasing the number of months of the draftees from 21 to 27. Do you think the government has an obligation to keep a contractual arrangement that has been made with those draftees during peace? Or do you think the government has a right to go ahead willy-nilly and extend that draft law from 21 to 27 months?
Yes, I would imagine that the government had the right to extend the draft law if they wished to do so. As to whether they should, I don't know. That all depends on the size of this army. How many boys do you need? That determines how long a service you have to have. Maybe 24 months, maybe 27, maybe 21. I would be loath to see it more than 24. And it seems to me that whatever has happened, it ought to be so arranged that if war doesn't come, they get out at the end of 24 months and others come in to take their places. Seems to me that is something the Army is very much inclined to avoid. After they've got the men trained, they like to keep them. And it's going to be a serious matter if over a long period of time here to take the boys, American boys, and more or less keep them indefinitely in the Army.
Mr. McNeil.
Senator, it's been mentioned here that you've said that the President was, in your opinion, without authority to involve us in the Korean War. Suppose you had authority at this moment to withdraw completely from the battleground at Korea. Would you do so?
Well, Mr. McNeil, I don't want to criticize people who don't, but I think, if you ask my opinion, I think I would.
You'd get out completely?
I think I would get out and fall back to a defensible position in Japan and foremost. I certainly would if I thought that there was danger by staying of losing any considerable number of additional men.
And you would protect both Formosa and Japan?
Yes.
One other thing, Senator. Suppose Eisenhower comes back and says we got to do this thing that you're against, and Congress debates it and decides that that's what we shall do. You will oppose it. After it's gone through that constitutional process, will you acquiesce in that decision?
Oh, yes. I accept. I vote against the Atlantic Pact, but I'm willing to accept the obligations of the Atlantic Pact.
One quick question, Mr. Reston.
Senator, I'm more interested, in view of Mr. McNeil's question, in what you would have done at the beginning of the Korean War had you been president. What would you have done about our treaty obligation at that time? Would you have gone in?
I don't think that's fair, Mr. Rester.
Oh, yes, that's fair. I wouldn't...
No, I mean, on account of the time, Senator, because...
I would have stayed out. You may have my speech on the Korean War.
I didn't mean... I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I didn't mean the question wasn't fair. I meant the length of time wasn't fair because you wouldn't have a chance to answer. Our time is up. This concludes our latest edition of Meet the Press. Thank you, Senator Taft, for being with us.